The sun blazed mercilessly over the tin roofs of Makoko, Lagos, as Elijah Okafor stared at his reflection in the cracked mirror of his modest apartment. At 32, the lines etched on his face told stories that most men twice his age hadn't lived to tell. His eyes, once hard and unyielding, now held a gentleness that still surprised him when he caught his own gaze. He adjusted the collar of his crisp white shirt, straightened his tie, and took a deep breath. In 2 hours, he would be standing before a congregation of 300 people, sharing his testimony for the first time. Elijah's story began in Enugu, eastern Nigeria, where he was born to hard-working parents who sacrificed everything to give him an education. His father, Joseph, worked double shifts at the local textile factory, while his mother, Grace, sold vegetables at the market. Their dream was simple: to see their son graduate from university, something neither of them had achieved. At 14, Elijah was bright and full of promise when he earned a scholarship to attend one of the most prestigious secondary schools in the state. His parents wept with joy the day they dropped him off at the boarding school gates, their hearts swelling with pride and hope. "Remember who you are, Elijah," his father had said, placing both hands on his shoulders. "You are a child of light." But the light in Elijah dimmed quickly. The school was a breeding ground for class divisions. The wealthy students from Lagos and Abuja formed exclusive cliques, flaunting their expensive gadgets and weekend trips abroad. Elijah, with his second-hand uniforms and simple sandals, became an easy target for ridicule. "Village boy," they would sneer as he walked past. "Does your father even own a car?" For months, Elijah endured the isolation, burying himself in his studies. But adolescence is really kind to the marginalized, and the desire to belong can overpower even the strongest moral foundations. During his second year, a new group emerged at the school, the Black Axes. They weren't like the other cliques. They welcomed boys from all backgrounds, as long as they were willing to embrace a new identity. They dressed differently, spoke in coded language, and carried themselves with a dangerous swagger that teachers seemed hesitant to challenge. Their leader was Deo, a charismatic third-year student whose father was rumored to be a powerful political figure in Lagos. Deo noticed Elijah's intelligence and his growing resentment. "You're smarter than all of them combined," Deo told him one evening, slinging an arm around Elijah's shoulders. "But in this world, being smart isn't enough. You need power, respect." It started innocently enough: a new handshake, a change in how he wore his uniform, learning their slang. Elijah told himself it was just style, just a way to fit in. His grades remained excellent, and he still wrote letters home filled with half-truths about his school life. When his mother asked about the new way he spoke on the phone, he laughed it off as just school culture. By 16, Elijah was fully initiated into the Black Axes. What had begun as a search for belonging had evolved into something darker. The group had connections to older university fraternities, and their activities extended beyond the school walls. Weekend missions involved small-time extortion, delivering messages to rival groups, and occasionally serving as lookouts for more serious operations. Elijah convinced himself this was all temporary, a means to survive school. He still maintained his academic excellence, a dual life that earned him a peculiar respect among both teachers and gang members. "You're going places," Deo would say. "When you get to university, you'll be fast-tracked into the Brotherhood. No more small-time operations." And despite the moral conflict that sometimes kept him awake at night, Elijah felt a thrill in this double existence. For the boy who once couldn't afford the right shoes, he now walked with a confidence that parted crowds in the school corridors. University came, and true to Deo's word, Elijah was welcomed into the confraternity, the university arm of what he now understood was a nationwide network. At the University of Lagos, studying economics, Elijah quickly rose through the ranks. His intelligence made him valuable for planning operations, and his calm demeanor kept him out of trouble with authorities. The operations grew more serious: campus protection rackets, exam fraud schemes, political intimidation during student elections. The Brotherhood had connections with powerful alumni who now occupied positions in business and politics. These elders would occasionally call upon the active members for tasks that blurred increasingly dangerous lines. By his third year, Elijah was a capo, responsible for a section of younger members. The scholarship boy from Enugu now drove a second-hand Toyota, wore designer clothes, and dated the most sought-after women on campus. When he visited home, he brought expensive gifts and spoke vaguely about business opportunities that funded his lifestyle. His mother noticed the change. "Your eyes are different," she said during one visit, her own eyes filling with tears. "What has happened to my son?" "I'm just growing up, Mama," he replied, avoiding her gaze. University changes people. The descent accelerated after graduation. While some members used their degrees to secure legitimate employment, maintaining gang connections as a side operation, Elijah went deeper. The skills that could have made him a brilliant economist were instead channeled into more elaborate criminal enterprises. By 25, he was coordinating operations across 3 states, with tentacles in everything from import duty evasion to election security contracts. The money flowed, and with it came power. Elijah moved his parents to a better house in Enugu, telling them it was from his consulting business. He purchased a flat in Victoria Island, drove a Mercedes, and was known in select nightclubs as a man to be respected and feared. But the higher he climbed, the more blood stained his hands. Not directly, Elijah was too smart for that, but his orders, his plans, his strategies led to violence he could no longer pretend was not his responsibility. One night, after a particularly brutal confrontation with a rival group that left 2 young men dead, Elijah stood on his balcony overlooking the Lagos Lagoon, a glass of whiskey trembling in his hand. The face of one of the dead men, barely 20 years old, wouldn't leave his mind. For the first time in years, he heard his father's voice clearly: "You are a child of light." He laughed bitterly into the night air. What light remained in him now? The turning point came unexpectedly. Elijah's father suffered a severe stroke, and he rushed back to Enugu. Sitting by his father's hospital bed, watching the once strong man struggle to form words, something broke inside Elijah. His father, sensing his son's inner turmoil, managed to grasp Elijah's hand with surprising strength. With great effort, he formed 3 words: "Not too late." For 2 weeks, Elijah remained in Enugu, spending days at the hospital and nights in his childhood home. Away from Lagos, from the constant demands and dangers of his other life, clarity began to emerge. He found an old Bible in his mother's room and, with nothing else to do during the long hospital vigils, began to read. The words that had meant little to him for years suddenly seemed to leap from the pages. Stories of redemption, of second chances, of light overcoming darkness resonated in ways they never had before. One night, alone in the hospital room while his father slept, Elijah fell to his knees beside the bed. "God," he whispered, the word foreign on his tongue after so many years, "if you're real, if you can hear me. I don't know if there's any way back from what I've become. But I can't do this anymore. Help me find a way out." It wasn't a dramatic conversion. No lights flashed, no voices spoke. But as he rose from his knees, Elijah felt something he hadn't experienced in years: hope. A fragile, tentative hope that perhaps his life wasn't yet a finished story. When his father stabilized, Elijah returned to Lagos with a decision. He would extract himself from the gang life. He knew enough about the organization to understand this would be neither simple nor safe. Members didn't just walk away, especially not couples with his level of knowledge. His strategy was methodical, befitting his calculating mind. First, he began to gradually delegate his responsibilities, citing a need to focus on legitimate business interests that could benefit the Brotherhood. He established a small import business as cover, actually running it legally. Over months, he carefully distanced himself from day-to-day operations while maintaining relationships with key figures. The second phase was more dangerous, quietly gathering evidence of operations and storing it securely as insurance. Not to betray his former brothers, but as protection against any attempt on his life should his intentions be discovered. The final phase involved creating a new life framework. Elijah began attending a small church far from his neighborhood, using a different name. There he met Pastor Solomon, a former gang member himself, who recognized the signs of someone seeking a way out. The path to redemption isn't easy, Solomon told him after Elijah finally confided in him. But it is possible. I'm living proof. Under Solomon's guidance, Elijah began the painful process of confronting his past, acknowledging the harm he had caused, and seeking a genuine transformation that went beyond simply leaving criminal activities behind. 18 months into his careful exit strategy, disaster struck. A young member, trying to earn favor, reported Elijah's church attendance to senior leadership. Within hours, Elijah's apartment was ransacked, his insurance files discovered despite careful hiding. That night, as he returned from a business meeting, 3 men approached him in the parking garage. He recognized them immediately, enforcers sent to deliver a message or worse. The elders want to see you, the lead man said, his hand resting meaningfully on the bulge beneath his jacket. Elijah knew what awaited him. Interrogation, likely torture, and either a forced return to the fold or elimination. In that moment, every instinct honed from years in the life screamed at him to fight, to leverage his connections, to counter-threaten with the release of his insurance files. Instead, he closed his eyes briefly and whispered, "Not my will, but yours." "I'll come," he said, surprising the enforcers with his calm. "But I want to speak directly to Adebayo." Adebayo was the highest elder, a man Elijah had met only twice but who ultimately controlled the Lagos operations. They took him to a compound in Ikoyi, secured his phone, and left him waiting in a lavish study for 3 hours, a psychological tactic he himself had once employed. When Adebayo finally entered, the older man's face was impassive. "Explain yourself," was all he said. And Elijah did. For the first time in his adult life, he spoke with complete honesty about his journey, his disillusionment, his father's stroke, and his gradual spiritual awakening. He admitted to gathering the insurance files but offered to surrender them completely. "I don't want war," Elijah said. "I just want out. I'll disappear. You'll never hear from me again." Adebayo studied him for a long time in silence. Then he said something unexpected. "I was like you once. Looking for a way out. I never found it." The elder's momentary vulnerability passed quickly, replaced by cold calculation. "The files. All copies. Tonight. Then you have 48 hours to leave Lagos. If you're seen here after that, or if anything ever leaks, your parents will suffer first." It was better than Elijah had dared hope for, though the threat to his parents would hang over him forever. He surrendered everything, liquidated what assets he could, and by dawn was on a bus to Kaduna in the north. A region where the Brotherhood had fewer connections. In Kaduna, Elijah Okafor ceased to exist. Using a variation of his mother's maiden name, he rented a small room and found work as an English tutor. The transition from power and luxury to anonymity and simplicity was brutal. Nightmares plagued him. Paranoia followed him down every street. The temptation to contact old associates, to reclaim some portion of his former status, assaulted him daily. What sustained him, surprisingly, was the faith that had begun as a desperate plea in a hospital room. He found a small evangelical church and became an active member, though still guarded about his past. The pastor, a woman named Ruth, sensed his inner struggles and offered counsel without pressing for details he wasn't ready to share. God doesn't just forgive our past, she told him once. He redeems it, uses it. Nothing is wasted in his economy. 3 years passed. Gradually, Elijah built a new life. His tutoring expanded into a small education consultancy. He began cautiously dating a kindergarten teacher named Halima, who brought laughter back into his world. The nightmares came less frequently. Then came the letter from his mother. His father had passed away. Despite the danger, Elijah knew he had to return to Enugu for the funeral. He took every precaution, changed his appearance, traveled by indirect routes, stayed with distant relatives. The funeral itself was a risk, but he couldn't bear the thought of his mother facing it alone. As he stood by the graveside, a hand gripped his shoulder from behind. Elijah tensed, ready for the worst. But when he turned, he faced not an enforcer but Deo, his first recruiter, now middle-aged and wearing the collar of a Catholic priest. "I've been looking for you for 2 years," Deo said as they sat in a quiet corner after the service. "Not for the reasons you fear. I left alive too." Deo explained that a police raid had gone wrong, resulting in the death of an innocent student. The incident had triggered his own spiritual crisis and eventual transformation. He'd been ordained just a year earlier and now worked specifically with young men at risk of gang recruitment. "When I heard rumors you'd gotten out, I couldn't believe it," Deo said. "You were the last person I expected to walk away at the height of your power. It gave me hope that anyone could change." Before they parted, Deo made an unexpected proposal: "I run a rehabilitation program in partnership with a ministry in Abuja. We need someone who understands the psychological pathways into and out of gang life. Someone who can speak truth to these young men." For the first time, Elijah saw a purpose for his dark past, not just a shameful secret to hide, but experience that could help pull others from the same pit. 2 years later, Elijah stood before the congregation in Abuja, adjusting his tie as he prepared to publicly share his testimony for the first time. The rehabilitation ministry had grown, now working with schools, universities, and even government agencies to address the roots of gang culture across Nigeria. His mother sat in the front row, next to Halima, now his fiancée. Behind them were 20 young men from the current rehabilitation cohort, former gang members at various stages in their own journeys of transformation. "My name is Elijah Okafor," he began, his voice steady despite the pounding of his heart. "And my story begins in a schoolyard, where a boy desperate to belong made a choice that nearly destroyed him." As he spoke, faces in the audience reflected shock, sadness, and ultimately hope. He held nothing back: the allure of power, the gradual moral compromises, the violence, the fear, and finally the arduous path to redemption. "I stand before you today not as a success story," he concluded, "but as a work in progress. Each day is a choice to walk in the light rather than return to darkness. Each day is an opportunity to use the very experiences that nearly destroyed me to help someone else find their way home." After the service, a teenage boy approached him, eyes downcast, hands fidgeting. "Sir," the boy said quietly, "I'm in school now, and there's this group. I've already started hanging with them. But hearing your story..." He looked up, eyes glistening. "Is it really possible to choose a different path?" Elijah placed his hands on the boy's shoulders, just as his father had done to him 20 years before. "Listen to me carefully," he said. "You are a child of light. And yes, there is always a way back to that light, no matter how far into the shadows you've wandered." As the boy walked away, Elijah felt a profound sense of completion. The circle that had begun with his own seduction into darkness was now bending toward light. Not just for him, but potentially for generations to come. That night, As he stood on the balcony of his modest Abuja apartment with Halima beside him, Elijah gazed up at the stars scattered across the Nigerian sky. "Do you think your father would be proud?" Halima asked softly, reading his thoughts. Elijah smiled, feeling a peace that had once seemed impossible. "Yes," he said. "But more importantly, I think he would recognize his son again." In the quiet of that moment, Elijah Okafor, once lost, now found, gave thanks for the long, painful journey that had led him home. Not to a place, but to himself, to his Creator, and to a purpose greater than the power he had once craved. Thank you for watching our video. We hope you were inspired by it. Please subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so that you can be notified when we post a video. Thank you. Stay blessed.